All right, guys, we are going to look at graphing a polar equation in the calculator. So first you want to go to your mode and change a couple of things. I recommend changing to degrees. You could do these in radians, but then you have to think of everything in radians, and kind of the way the calculator does it, it'll put the radians in decimal, and it's harder for us to recognize. So much easier for us to recognize degrees. But what you definitely need to do is change from function mode over to polar mode. And what the polar mode allows us to do is if you go to y equals, now instead of y equals, they all say r equals, which is, what we want, right? We're in polar. So the example on the notes was r equals -3 sine of theta. So -3 sine. And the button beside alpha, where you normally get your x, that automatically changes the variable depending on the mode. So because we're in polar, it makes it a theta automatically. Right? You don't want to graph just yet. A couple of things you want to change. Go to your window. And right now it is defaulted to radians, which is graphing only from 0 to 2 pi, 6.28. Which means that it's only going to plug in right now, because we're in degree mode, it's only going to plug in 0 degrees to 6 degrees. That's not a lot of points. So a lot of these are going to be dealing with sines and cosines. If we go 0 to 360, that's one full period, and that's usually enough. So 0 min, or theta min 0, theta max 360. Theta step, that means how often it's going to graph a point. So right now that's saying 0.13 degrees. Every 0.13 degrees it's going to graph a point. If you pick too small of a number, it's going to take forever to graph. So what I always do is maybe start with a little bigger number, and if your graph is too boxy, you can come back and decrease this number. Okay, so go ahead and hit graph, and we can see that it is a smaller graph down here. We can see all of it. It does look a little boxy, and what I mean by boxy is you can see that there's a point here and a point here, and all they did is connect it, right, with a straight line. So I am going to go back to my window, and I'm going to decrease that a little. So you can try decreasing it to 10, 5. This is kind of where you get to learn how to use the window in your calculator a little better. That's a little better. If I were to look at this, I would think it's an oval. You have to remember that your screen is rectangular, and what's happened is 1 unit on the x-axis is actually taking up, a bigger distance than 1 unit on the y-axis. So to fix that, there's a zoom square, zoom 5, that will automatically fix your screen so that, we'll see more x values than we do y values, because the x-axis is longer in this picture. Now you can see it is more of a circle, but I also can see it's a little boxy again, right? Like point here to point here, and they just drew a line. So I'm going to go back and decrease that a little more even. And these are things you might not have to do. You might only be graphing right now to match up an equation to a graph, and you might have already seen the answer by this. If you are matching up equations and graphs, another thing you can do is use your table. If you go to your table, right now it is going to have every degree plotted, right? 1 degrees, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees. And that might be a lot to flip through if I needed, 200 degrees. So last thing I'm going to show you is to remind you that if you go to second window, that is table set, you can tell your table automatically where to start. So I can jump to 360 degrees if I needed to. And then delta table, delta, that triangle, it means change. It's what increment you want the table to increase by. So maybe you want to see every 15 degrees instead of every 1 degree in the table. So the table's not changing what plotted, right? That was in the window settings. But this is just changing my table so that now the table increases by 15 degrees. So I can see, quicker, oh, there's 135, there's 150 degrees. And so depending on what you're trying to do, that may be more helpful.